Taiwan police clear protesters from the executive yuan. Victory for the New People's Party in yesterday's district council by-election. And a Chinese search plane spots floating objects in the Indian Ocean.
Good evening. Taiwan authorities used water cannon overnight to disperse protesters who stormed the Executive Yuan building. More than 100 people were injured and scores were arrested by police. Meanwhile, demonstrators are still occupying the legislature 7 days after they forced their way into the building in protest against the cross-strait service trade agreement. Taipei police continued to remove the protesters at daybreak today. Many of the students in the demonstration then switched their focus back to the Legislative Yuan, where the unrest started. The student unions at a number of universities called for a boycott of classes. The opposition Democratic Progressive Party criticized President Ma Ying-jeou for failing to control the situation. They accused the police of abuse of power. The government said it is disappointed that what started off as a peaceful demonstration has turned violent. Jenny Lam has more details about the chaos that began to unfold last night.
Riot police moved towards the Executive Yuan in Taipei overnight. They first targeted the crowd gathered outside the back entrance to the building. Protesters who resorted to lying down were pulled away one by one. And in the melee, some had to be taken to hospital. It took authorities about half an hour to clear the demonstrators there. And they moved to the front. After a lot of pushing and shoving in a sea of riot shields and batons, the water cannons moved in at around 4:30 a.m. The demonstrators did what they could to stay put. One water cannon truck ended up with a burst tire. The former chairman of the opposition Democratic Progressive Party, Frank Sher, was there to show support for the protesters. He too ended up soaked to the skin. One by one, those who forced their way into the Executive Yuan were led away by police. The protest that started in the Legislative Yuan last Tuesday expanded to the Executive Yuan last night when students barged into the compound at around 8 p.m. They used blankets to protect themselves as they climbed over barbed wire barricades set up by the police. And soon the Executive Yuan building became a free-for-all. Over the balconies and through the windows, they gained access to the cabinet offices. Police efforts to keep them at bay were in vain. The protesters simply outnumbered the police. It was also a chaotic scene at the front of the Executive Yuan building. Scuffles between protesters and police left a number of people injured. The crowd cleared the way for ambulances to reach those who were hurt among them. Meanwhile, police sent in reinforcements, but the protesters broke through one police line after another. This man said they simply wanted to expand their protest to let the government know they won't acquiesce. They want the government to yield to their demand and withdraw the cross-strait service trade agreement. They feared the deal, which would open up the Taiwan market to mainland companies, would push small and medium-sized companies on the island out of business and lead to job losses. More important, they accused the government of lacking transparency in coming to the agreement. Trying to justify the clampdown on the demonstrators overnight, Premier Zhang Yihua said this morning that the government should not sit by idly while people took over the power center of the administration. He explained that confidential documents on Taiwan's domestic, foreign, as well as economic and social affairs are stored inside the Executive Yuan building. So the government had to intervene to protect the security of Taiwan. He refuted comparisons with the government crackdown on student protesters at Beijing's Tiananmen Square in 1989. He said it is right for students to express concern for public affairs and that many of them did try to keep their action peaceful. And he urged the protesters to hold talks with the authorities. Police finally regained control of the Executive Yuan later in the morning. Inside, protesters left behind a trail of destruction. They even removed the doors to the offices of the Premier and his deputy. The Executive Yuan building was constructed during the Second World War. Because it's a historic building, authorities say repair work has to be carried out by experts, and they have yet to come up with an estimate of the cost. Jenny Lam, TVB News.
Now our Diane To is standing by outside the Legislative Yuan in Taipei. Diane?
That's right. Well, they're in a bit of a situation here. President Ma Ying-jeou had an emergency meeting with the Premier and Vice President earlier. Ma called for calm and hoped the controversy could be contained within the legislature. Meanwhile, the head of the Legislative Yuan, Wang Jingping, was in talks with the opposition parties all day. Earlier today, Wang met with representatives of all parties, including members of the ruling Kuomintang, to discuss a way out of the current crisis. There was no conclusion this afternoon, and the meeting will continue tomorrow. In the morning, he also held a meeting with opposition lawmakers who agreed to reject the cross-strait service trade bill and restart from scratch the talks on the deal with the mainland. It was a unanimous decision made without any of the Kuomintang members present. So, of course, it has been rejected by the ruling party, which insists that it will not recognize the vote made today. Outside the Legislative Yuan, the students have come back in force. They seem more determined than ever after what they see as an abuse of police power when authorities cleared people from the Executive Yuan. Many students are skipping class to support the rally, complaining that President Ma Ying-jeou's response and the way his government is handling the matter provoked them to come out and protest.
He commanded the police to disperse the students with violent force. So I think I'm here for my classmates.
Legislative people, they don't really supervise the government. Because Ma Ying-jeou, President Ma, he holds the power to nominate those legislators for the next election. So if they don't go with him, what do you think would happen?
Leaders of the movement are extremely wary of the negative consequences if the protest descends into chaos. So while they continue to call on more people to join the rally after last night, they've become even more careful and organized to make sure they don't run the risk of having the purpose of the quest defeated. Student spokesman Lin Feifan said they don't have to be confrontational and vowed to stay put to guard the legislature in an orderly manner. Student unions have issued statements to condemn what they called authoritarian violence. A spokeswoman said there is a lot of discontent in Taiwan over what she described as a crisis in democracy. We are against the passage of the trade pact with the mainland without going through normal legislative procedures, she said. And many of those on the street today believe this is an important lesson on democratic rights in Taiwan. Just minutes before, student helpers were here giving out burgers and sandwiches and food of the like to protesters here. From time to time, they offer them wet wipes and water. This is the level of organization here. There are also cell phone charging stations and recycling stations. They're clearly prepared to be here for the long run. Now, given Wang Jingping's open dispute with President Ma late last year, when Ma tried to get him fired, it's still very much up in the air whether Wang will actually get the students to end their occupation here. Now, that's all from me in Taipei for now. Back to you in the studio.
Thanks to Diane To. Now, to some other news. In the New People's Party's Judy Chan won yesterday's Southern District Council by-election in the South Horizon's West constituency. She garnered more than half of the 4,056 votes cast, beating two other candidates. Jenny Lam reports.
The moment of victory for Judy Chan of the New People's Party. She said she had to work hard to win over voters because she was aware that she was up against a well-known legislator. That legislator is the Democratic Party's Sin Chung-kai, who admitted that a major defeat was beyond their expectations. People Power's Erica Yoon failed in her bid for a seat in the Southern District Council, but she was moved by the fact that she beat the Democratic Party candidate in a middle-class constituency such as South Horizons West. She says the Democratic faction is split between her supporters, who won nothing short of public nomination of candidates in the 2017 chief executive election, and those who are open to negotiation. She sees yesterday's election results as a vote for public nomination. A total of 4,059 voters cast their ballots yesterday, representing a turnout rate of 53.6%. Erica Yoon won just over 1,000 votes, Sin Chung Kai had less than 1,000 votes, and the winner, Judy Chan, more than 2,000 votes. The by-election was held to fill the district council seat vacated by Andrew Fung, a former Democratic Party member who quit to work for the government. Jenny Lam, TVB News.
A Chinese military aircraft searching for the missing Malaysia Airlines plane spotted several floating objects today in remote seas off of Australia. This latest lead adds to a string of satellite sightings this weekend that have so far been unsuccessful. The Chinese IL-76 aircraft spotted 2 large floating objects and several smaller white ones in waters some 2,500 kilometers southwest of Perth. Even though the U.S. military flew in a black box detector, nothing was found.
Unfortunately, we didn't find anything. It is quite disappointing that we didn't. We want to be out there helping, and we want to find what everyone's looking for.
Japan joined the search today, making it 8 aircraft hot on the trail, including help from Australia, New Zealand, and the United States.
The Japanese cooperation is fantastic. They are highly professional and they'll bring a tremendous capability to this operation.
To ensure nothing is missed at this new satellite hit, China immediately deployed its icebreaker, Snow Dragon, to comb the waters. Plus, a flotilla of other Chinese ships are making their way. Australia's Deputy Prime Minister was eager to check out yesterday's sighting by the French. He said it consists of radar echoes in the same part of the ocean where Australia and China previously picked up satellite images.
Now, the French sighting is, I guess, a piece of new material because that's in a completely different location. That's about 850 kilometres north of our current search area. So we need to check that out as well.
On the investigation front, background checks of all 239 on board have found no militant or criminal links. Because the aircraft was deliberately diverted, authorities are officially investigating on a criminal basis. They're leaning towards ruling out pilot suicide because the plane flew on for hours instead of taking a sudden nosedive. Many Chinese families in Beijing find comfort in holding vigil. But there are those that anguish over whether their loved ones are still alive or the hope that they didn't suffer an agonizing death. One of the last symbols of Ukrainian resistance on the Crimean Peninsula has been overrun by Russian troops. The latest show of Russian military forces comes as leaders from 53 countries gather for a nuclear security summit in the Netherlands. As James Aiken reports, Western leaders will also be meeting to consider their next move in response to Russia's takeover of Crimea.
Dozens of Ukrainian servicemen are said to be under detention after Russian forces stormed yet another Ukrainian military base, this time in Feodosia.
We are not fighting with Russians, we are not fighting with anybody.
Russian forces have now seized Ukrainian ships and most military bases in Crimea. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, nuclear terrorism is officially the main topic of a 2-day summit. The summit's host says the international community is still counting on Russia's cooperation in nuclear security.
We need to do everything we can to prevent nuclear terrorism. And we have gathered here with that clear aim.
All I can say is I hope the same motivations that drove Russia to be a partner in this effort will still exist. This is bigger than